I think his audience is progressives who are politically engaged, which, if you are the Democratic Party, that's a valuable base, because I'm sure those people have blue collar family members that also vote. These are the people that are paying attention to politics, that make time for it for whatever reason. That is what they do. Those people are very important in the political and democratic process in the United States because they will remind their family about elections. They will tell them their views about elections. If you want the left to win, you should be giving your audience the talking points to win over their family members for voting for a leftist candidate. That just is common sense. And so to me, this just reeks of Democratic Party interference, Democratic Party consultants going and talking to Kyle Kulinski and saying, like, listen, this is our argument for this. This is why.
That's hilarious. Okay, that's where it starts to get really crazy.
What?
Like a fucking secret agent shows up and knocks on Kyle's door in a trench coat and and he says, "Listen, you really want to grow in this town. You know how you get up and you really climb the ranks in this town, buddy."
Usually this is the kind of story that we talk about. Folks over at Rising, I think, usually consider themselves a bit above talking about breadtube drama and covering the commentary of other progressive commenters, kind of like Kyle Kulinski. But apparently Kyle's recent comments about Cornel West made enough waves on Twitter and generated enough controversy that the folks over at Rising felt like it was necessary to chime in. Now, this is not Bree and Robbie. This is actually the Friday hosts, one of which is Jessica Burbank, who you might know from TYT. She's no longer
the B
TYT.
team.
Yeah, exactly. And then I'm not actually sure the name of the other host. I think she's more of a right-wing host. I'm not as familiar with her work. I'm usually not terribly impressed by her commentary.
Yeah. This at all. I'm just here to do my due diligence and white knight for Kyle Kulinski, like I always do. No, I'm kidding. But super excited to see what goes on here. I actually don't agree with Kyle on this, so this will be a good discussion.
Yeah, I'm excited to check this out. Like I said, I do think it's pretty funny that Rising is doing Vanguard style coverage of what Kyle said. But I mean, might as well,
indistinguishable from what one of our headlines would be.
Absolutely indistinguishable. Yeah. And again, I mean, I don't think there's any problem with that. That's why we do it. We're clearly not above it either. It's a great way to frame these sort of discussions. If we just did a live stream today being like, discussing Cornel West and voting blue no matter who, like, no one would really watch that. It wouldn't really be that interesting or exciting to click on. If you frame it through this lens and kind of talk about some of the drama and some of the backlash that people like Kyle are receiving for their comments, I think that just makes for a generally more interesting discussion. And clearly the crew over at Rising agrees, which is why they released this segment. But yeah, I genuinely think there's an interesting conversation to be had here. It's one that we've been having here at the Vanguard for a while, including with Kyle Kulinski himself. We went on Crystal Kyle and Friends recently, posted a lot of clips from that to our channel, and we kind of had a version of this debate about whether or not it was worth supporting Cornel West, whether or not it was worth, voting green in 2024, given how bad Trump is, and given the fact that in Kyle's estimation, Biden has been better than expected.
Leftist commentator Kyle Kulinski is being accused of shaming 2024 Green Party candidate Cornel West for running outside of the party duopoly. Let's watch.
Now, on the Cornel West front, look, understand something. I would like to talk to him and ask him, what do you think you're doing here? Like, what do you think you're doing here? Do you actually think you can win? Because you can't, because we don't have ranked choice voting. We still have first past the post voting. So what's your highest goal that you think you could achieve? Is it the 5% for the Green Party? Is that what it is? So that you can get matching funds and make it more viable? But again, I hate to tell you, the Green Party and no third party will be viable unless and until we get ranked choice voting. Because until that point, there's...
Now, I will say, I can kind of understand why people found that to be sort of condescending. And the reason why is because Cornel West is going all over the media right now, both corporate media and progressive media, explaining why he's running. I mean, I think he basically makes the case for his candidacy every time he's interviewed, every time he goes on basically any show, right? And it's not like he doesn't get asked this question. Aren't you afraid about spoiling the election? Aren't you worried that people are going to blame you for Donald Trump? Like, he's been asked these questions and he's justified his decision to run over and over again. I think he's made it pretty clear what he views kind of the point of this as being. So I think that's fair if you disagree with his reasons that he has listed. But I do understand why some people found it maybe a little bit condescending for Kyle to be like, I don't even get why he's running. Like, I want to ask him, why is he running? He has explained it.
Yeah, for sure. And I know that Kyle is like really married to the fact that you have to have ranked choice voting before you can, pursue something like a third party option in this country. But I also think that it kind of, I think that one thing that he doesn't do is he doesn't give a lot of weight to the argument that, hey, you can actually walk and chew bubblegum at the same time. Like he doesn't like, and we presented this argument to him, and I don't think he really bought into it, and that's fine. He can make, like, he's free to make up his own mind. But my position has always been that, yeah, in a state where we know it's going to go blue, or it's going to go red. Like, I am sorry, guys, I have lived in fucking Kansas City my entire life. There is no chance in fucking hell that it's going to Biden in 2020. Gavin and I will both eat Doc Martens, one each boot and a pair if it went to Joe Biden. It's just not going to happen. The infrastructure is not here. The electorate's not here. There's it's just not going to happen, right? California is not going to go to Trump. It's just not going to fucking happen. Okay. Like, I don't care how many actually Trump's getting a lot more, Republicans in California. It doesn't matter. He can gobble up as many as he wants to in Orange County and in, Lodi and Sacramento. And it doesn't fucking matter. He's not going to beat out the population overload of Los Angeles and all that kind of stuff. It's just not going to happen, right? So in those states, why not actually make your vote have a little bit of meaning instead of throwing it away and voting for a third party candidate? And of course, like, Gavin and I are not delusional. We're not like ideologues. We're not zealots. We're not trying to misrepresent the case that Cornel West is somehow going to be the actual president. That's why we've put together the very modest proposal that if you're in a safe state where basically the electoral college makes it so your vote has no impact on the election because you're not in one of the 12 critical states, if we're being like extra generous, right? But let's say I live in one of the 38 states where in the fucking past decade it hasn't mattered for fuck all, right? Now I can make my vote matter. Now I can make it mean something, and I have somebody with the honor and the integrity and the history and the clout of Cornel West to kind of carry that wagon and banner or whatever the fuck you want to say across the finish line to 5%, which was something that Ralph Nader couldn't accomplish, was something that Jill Stein couldn't accomplish, and obviously Howie Hawkins didn't accomplish either. This is moving the needle forward, and you don't need ranked choice voting to accomplish that. So I agree with Kyle that we need to reform our election system to accommodate third parties 100%. I don't think a single person would disagree with that, but I just don't understand why writing off the 5%, getting federal funding, making it actually have a victory, setting a goal and achieving it is so important for the left, because so often we set goals and we don't achieve them and we get some watered down version of it. This could be a real goal the left could set that has basically no consequences at all. Again, we just laid out a plan, so there's no jeopardy to Joe Biden in the final election result. The popular vote does not matter. Audie the bug catcher did the quick math for us and said that the 4% or whatever, or 5% that we need could come from California alone if you just use the last 2020 model as a example, right? So we see that that's a huge possibility, and I think that that's what's frustrating people about Kyle, is that he's not engaging with that portion of the argument.
Right. And again, I agree that you can make the case all day, and I will agree with you that it's kind of a bit of a fool's errand to actually, think that someone could win the presidency until we have ranked choice voting. Like, if you're someone that thinks, Cornel West is seriously going to become president, and no, he's probably not. Unfortunately, I wish that was the case. Probably not until we do have something like ranked choice voting. But then you have to ask, okay, well, how do we get ranked choice voting? Well, I don't think just voting for Democrats who are largely against ranked choice voting, I don't think that's going to get us ranked choice voting. But if we popularize the idea of ranked choice voting by popularizing third parties and third party candidates, by getting people interested in third party movements via the candidacy of someone like Dr. Cornel West, well, then they say, how do I actually make this guy president? How do we actually get the Green Party into the White House? And then they find out, well, we got to work on ranked choice voting. So one fuels the other. And until there is some sort of organic interest in third parties and some sort of a desire for them to be victorious, then it's going to be hard to get people interested in doing activism on behalf of ranked choice voting in the first place. Plus, say we actually get Cornel West to 5%, all of a sudden the Democrats actually start freaking out. And now they are really genuinely worried about the spoiler effect. And they say, oh, fuck. Now there's another leftist party with federal funding, it's going to be taking votes from us. How do we neutralize this threat? Well, all of a sudden, you're going to see Democratic states starting to pass ranked choice voting because they don't want Green Party candidates spoiling the election and tossing elections to Democrats. Now, I'm not saying in every single state immediately ranked choice voting will be passed, but I'm going to guess that the efforts will be expedited once the Green Party has federal funding and starts to become an even more formidable force on an electoral level, if in fact that happens.
Always going to be this perception, you're just a spoiler candidate. And by the way, if we get into a general election and it's Biden versus Trump, and Trump ends up winning because Cornel West got 5% of the vote or something, or 3% of the vote, and he gets blamed, that's going to set the movement back so much. People are going to look at leftists as spoiled brats who are just getting in the way. Now, that's totally separate from the question as to whether or not the spoiler effect actually is real. But there's going to be a perception that it's real, and everybody's going to blame the left for Donald Trump winning.
Some of Kulinski's viewers are calling this a mask-off moment for the YouTuber, since he pretty much said the exact opposite 2 months ago.
The backlash that's happening online, there's a decent amount of backlash where people are like, what are you doing? Like, do you know like who these people are? And then I see a lot of people making a point, which I think is a fair point, which is like, if you're going to run as a Green Party or an independent, because the Green Party, for example, I think the last election they had ballot access for 48 states.
Yeah, they have a real organization.
Yeah, even like the Libertarians have between like 48 states and 50 and all the states. Yeah. You know what I mean? So as far as third parties go, the only ones that are even remotely viable, and I use that term loosely, is the Green Party and the Libertarians.
I mean, you also have, DSA out there, which has never fielded a presidential candidate before.
Keep on saying.
Chapters nationwide, and it's a real organization.
And I don't think this clip is quite the gotcha that the Hills Rising is acting like it is. They say, here's a clip of Kyle saying the exact opposite a couple months ago. And then it's Kyle being like, well, the Green Party is more serious than the People's Party.
Right. They cut that out. They cut out the part where they're obviously talking about how unserious the People's Party is, which is such a fucking hatchet job. And like, it completely ridiculous because it was embarrassing as fuck that Cornel West tried to launch his presidential campaign with the People's Party. Everybody knows that it is a shell of an organization that they've never been able to get ballot access, which was the point Kyle was making. Like, I disagree with Kyle on his take about Cornel West, but this was lazy.
Right. This clip came out in the context of Dr. West declaring his candidacy as a People's Party candidate, which basically everyone serious immediately was like, wait, what? Why are you doing that? So Kyle was basically saying like, all right, if you're going to run as a third party candidate, which is already a strategy that I kind of disagree with fundamentally because of the lack of ranked choice voting from Kyle's perspective, right? At least do it through the one that's, in his words, remotely viable. He threw the word remotely in there to make it clear that he didn't even really think it was viable. But if any of them were even remotely viable, it's the Green Party, not the freaking People's Party. So I don't think that's quite the hypocrisy burn that they think it is.
Honestly, it's embarrassing. Also, can we talk about this, guys? Can we talk about this? Like, hey, man, the executives at Rising, I don't know if this will ever get back to them, but you guys need to swallow your pride and hire me and Gavin. If at least make us an offer so we can make a video about it. Because I mean, if you're scraping the bottom of the barrel for like hosts like this is like the most like boring, stale ass presenters I've ever seen for the Hill. I'm sorry, I'm just being introduced to these ladies for the first time. I'm sure their personality is dazzling outside of their work. This isn't like a fucking criticism of their character, okay? But like, look at this, like listen to this, really, like it's just the most like. Yes, hello, I am presenting to you this information. Thank you so much for putting on The Hills Rising. Today we are talking about Kyle Kulinski. He's calling out Dr. West for running third party. Let's watch.
Yeah, sometimes Jessica makes decent points. I think she makes decent points sometimes, but I totally agree. They're no Brie and Robbie.
I mean, it's just like you forget that I don't forget, but when I watch it, I'm like, damn, dog, like even executive media companies will just make horrible decisions as far as like who is a host. Like, we have a cheap show. We're not putting any money into this besides like fucking our internet bill and electricity and like these Shure mics. I've been too lazy to even get myself a fucking new stand. I've just been holding my microphone for fucking ever because I'm like, well, I know it's like Gavin's, but I'll fucking just, I'll make do, right? These guys have a whole operation. They have like earpieces. There's a light guy. There's a sound guy. There's a producer. Right. And I'm like, this is the best you can get for fucking talent. This is the best you can fucking find. Like, I mean, I get that it's your main crew's day off, but you'd think you were at least investing in a minor league that was going to, one day pay off. Again, no offense to these ladies, but I'm just like,
2020, he tweeted, "As a left-winger who will not vote for Biden, I want you to know I'm 100% okay with you blaming me if Trump wins a second term. I mean it. Blame me. Then get to thinking real hard how you're going to get me to support your candidate the next time. Maybe even ask me. I'll tell you." So Kyle Kulinski, maybe a little bit hypocritical. I don't know, Jessica. That original tweet that he sent talking about how he wasn't going to vote for Joe Biden and he's fine with being blamed for Biden losing because he refuses to support him. And then criticizing someone for daring to run as a third-party candidate seems pretty inconsistent.
I don't know Kyle Kulinski's background. I don't listen to Kyle Kulinski. I don't know anything about him, but I can judge based off of what he has said there, that he has not spent a lot of time as a grassroots organizer. And I think when you're a political commentator and your commentary isn't routed in facts, in data, or the perceptions of the public or a political movement, you tend to get led astray. You tend to contradict yourself. And that's really what we see happening here. If you are someone who believes in what Cornel West's platform is, which I assume, and I'm sure his audience does as well, assume Kyle Kulinski does. But the argument he's making there is about viability of the movement, viability of the campaign that Cornel West is running. And he's complaining that if this doesn't go well for him and he pulls 5% of the vote or what have you, and it spoils the election and Donald Trump becomes president and those votes are taken away from Joe Biden, it is your job as a member of the left and a political commentator that's very popular, explain why that's not the case. Don't just be like, hey, this could cause some criticism down the line. Yeah, okay, what's your argument for why the criticism's invalid? We'll never get to a place where we have a viable third party that actually represents the ideas of the left if the left never runs candidates. There's about 60% of the country that's participating at most. This is not an argument about who's spoiling the election. Cornel West running is about pulling the 40% of the country that doesn't participate in the political process because they don't feel they're represented, because they don't believe in it. That's what populist movement should be about. So any excuse about, Cornel West just being a spoiler and that's why he shouldn't run is just service to the Democratic Party, just quelling any dissent from the left so that leftists have no options but to vote for the candidate that is a little bit closer to their views than.
Okay, I actually agree with a lot of what this lady is saying right now. I think that she's pretty much hitting the nail on the head. But yeah, and I see that the chat really likes this lady. So I'm sorry I stepped in shit with you guys when I said that it was a little dull. I stand by that. It's not the most engaging commentary. I was falling asleep. But even though I did agree with what she's saying, and I think that that's the whole point, right? Like, Dr. West isn't trying to poach the kind of voters that, are going to be swayed by Joe Biden, right? He's trying to reach the voters that were making the case that, frankly, Kyle was 18 months ago, right? Like, there are way better videos to hypocrisy burn Kyle with. Like, I'm just saying, like, as somebody who's watched Kyle Kulinski for a long time, like, I remember him, like, maybe 3 years ago saying, I'm not going to tell anybody, even if you live in a swing state, to vote for Joe Biden, right? Like, he made a bunch of videos like that. So clearly he's evolved his position, which is totally fine. And it's something that happens to everybody in the, commentary world. It's not like the end of the world to have a video where you said something and then you changed your mind. I think that that's just part of, being a growing, evolving person that's, changing. Obviously there are times where you're like, okay, if Kyle tomorrow decides that he's like a MAGA supporting like flag waving Trumper, then I'm going to be like, that's like, not a, rational ideological transition, but whatever, he's free to make up his mind. But Cornel West is trying to reach the voter that Kyle was 18 months ago, right? The people who are saying not good enough. I am not showing up for Joe Biden. I am not going to pull the lever for this guy. He doesn't represent any of my values. I think he's a criminal. I think that he's, too brain dead to be president. And on top of that, he supports a bunch of policies that I hate. And also he betrayed a bunch of promises like canceling student debt, raising the federal minimum wage, doing X, Y, and Z, right? And I'm not going to vote for him. Those are the people that Cornel West is trying to reach anyway. And while he does appeal to like some minutia of people who in polling would support Joe Biden, that doesn't mean that they would actually show up and pull the lever for him, right? And it doesn't even mean that they'll actually show up and vote for Cornel West on election day for the Green Party.
Yeah,
I've been a little surprised to see that Cornel West, or excuse me, that Kyle's been so like, skittish on Cornel West, considering the fact that it felt like not so long ago he was more open to it. or at least more anti-Joe Biden.
Well, I think that here, okay, I disagree with Kyle's take. You guys know that. We debated Kyle on KKF about this, and me and Zach were, advocating for Cornel West and, trying to make the case for why we thought it was important to get them to 5%. So you guys know that I disagree with Kyle, but what I don't think is an accurate criticism is this kind of hypocrisy burn and acting like he's super inconsistent, right? First of all, I don't love the fact that Jessica was like, this proves that he's out of touch with the activist left or something like that. Not giving him credit for having, experience in the activist left, as Mike says. Kyle practically started the grassroots Justice Democrats. Also, I don't really think it's Kyle's responsibility to speak for the activist left or to even be 100% in touch with the activist left. Like, he is an opinion commentator. If his opinion is out of touch with whatever Jessica perceives to be the opinion of the activist left, then Kyle still has a right to state his opinion. And honestly, that makes him more intellectually honest if he is stating an unpopular opinion, despite the fact that he knows it's going to be controversial. So I don't think that's a very legitimate criticism. She admitted that she doesn't watch Kyle, that she doesn't really, know about his ideology or his ideological evolution. But the fact of the matter is that if you have been watching Kyle, if you do watch Secular Talk, he's actually been very honest about his political evolution in this regard. For one, he says quite frequently that he genuinely thinks Joe Biden is a better president than he expected Joe Biden to be. So if you pull up comments from before Joe Biden was elected and say, well, you seem way more anti-Joe Biden than now, he would say, yeah, that's because Joe Biden has been a much more progressive president than I expected him to be. Now, again, that's something we can disagree with. I'm not particularly impressed by Joe Biden, not at all. I'm planning on supporting Cornel West. But Kyle has been honest about the fact that in his opinion, Biden is better than he expected Biden to be. And also he's been honest about the fact that Trump, I think, was a little bit worse than he expected to be. When Trump was in the White House, I think he actually went further than Kyle expected him to go, especially when it came to the January 6th stuff and the, attempted subversion of American democracy. There's clips going around of Kyle kind of like, quote unquote, minimizing the threat of Trump from like 2015, where he was like, Trump's no different than any other Republican. And he's just, putting an uglier face on the same old politics. But his commentary did change after Trump tried to steal the election. And again, I think it's fair for Kyle to change his opinion based on the fact that Trump turned out to be more of a fascist than he expected.
It's totally fair. All I was saying is that I think Cornel West is trying to reach people who feel more like Kyle did before he had that evolution. You know what I mean? I think that is the point, and that was more like the point that I was agreeing with. Like, they played the clip at the beginning where Kyle's like, I just want to know why you're doing this. Why are you running? Right. And I think that he was doing that to reach the kind of voter, that when they put up a tweet from Kyle where he says like, or whatever, like, oh, support Joe Biden or don't, or, he was like, I'm not going to tell anybody, blah, 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 right? From an old tweet where it's like, you can do whatever you want. Like, I'm not going to tell you to vote for Joe Biden, even in a swing state. This was like his position, like circa 2020, right? I just think that Cornel West is appealing to people who, maybe don't feel the same way that Kyle has, where like Joe Biden exceeded their expectations, right? That's what that is, where I'm at. And I get where you're coming from, that like Kyle has experience with the activist community, but I also think it's safe to say that there is a fair amount of the activist community that kind of does agree with Cornel West and does agree, that we need to have a much more rigid, I don't know. I think it's always funny that people try and claim the activist community as like a monolith, right? Like, one of the homies that I know that is like the most like on the ground activist, he's like a Biden bro. Like, this dude constantly tells me about all the weed, like minutiae. You know what I mean?
I mean, way more progressives. If you want to talk about the activist left, let's be honest, way more Bernie voters turned around and voted for the Democrat than did for the Green Party. So if anything, I mean, we don't have to like it, but Kyle's take is actually more in touch with the quote unquote activist left. Like, that is just the reality. Again, we don't have to like it, but the numbers do suggest that most of Bernie's voters did not vote for the Green Party candidates. Most of them voted for Bernie. Most progressives in general
more than Hillary voters voted for Obama.
Exactly. Right. And also, I again, I agree with the criticism of the substance here. I do agree that what Kyle said, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, sounded kind of condescending, with him just saying to Cornel West, like, you know, I just want to ask Cornel West, why are you doing this? Like, what do you expect to happen? And again, Cornel West has already answered that question over and over again. So I think that's fair to criticize Kyle for, absolutely. But what I don't agree with at all is when Jessica said at the end here, he's like, she basically accuses Kyle of trying to further this logic of, you know, vote blue no matter who. She said he's basically just trying to quell any sort of resistance to Joe Biden, which is ridiculous, of course, because Kyle Kulinski, who's the biggest fan of fucking Marianne Williamson on YouTube besides me? Kyle Kulinski. And who's the woman who's challenging Joe Biden? Quite literally the only progressive challenging Joe Biden, Marianne Williamson. Kyle is a Marianne stan, not a fucking Biden, bro. He is supporting the single progressive Democrat who actually is trying to oust Joe Biden. So don't act like he's just trying to convince people to vote blue no matter who, and just, you know, oh, just suck it up and vote for Joe Biden, guys. No point in resisting him. No, the whole message of the Secular Talk Show for the past several months has been, we got to support Marianne. We got to get, you know, debates, pressure debates.
The other one. That's a state we've been in for far too long, and there have been many candidates that have run to try and shake things up. But Kyle Kulinski's argument there doesn't test against his other arguments he's made himself very well, or the typical views of a leftist. So I just wonder where it's coming from as a political commentator. What makes you decide, you know what, I'm going to start making excuses for the Democratic Party, actually? It seems like a big switch up, and I'm curious as to where that comes from.
Yeah, he keeps talking about the perception mattering more than the reality of whether or not Cornel West is a spoiler candidate. And I think you're right. He should be the one explaining to people why that's not the case. If you're not in media to change perceptions, and really why even bother? That's kind of the whole point why we get on these screens and talk to people, is to try to explain the issues to them. Sometimes I learn more from the viewers than they learn from me, to be fair, but that's always the goal. And then also, how are you going to sit there and criticize a third party candidate as a member of the Democratic Party when the establishment is so hell-bent, it seems, on getting rid of progressive candidates? I mean, they basically stole the primary from Bernie back in 2016. So what is the alternative that Kyle Kulinski would suggest? The Democratic establishment clearly.
Okay, it's fair to point out that the Democrats stole the primary from Bernie Sanders. I point that out all the time. It is incredibly obvious that it happened, and it's equally accurate to point out how difficult, if not, you know, impossible it is for a genuine progressive or a genuine socialist like Bernie Sanders to actually win the Democratic Party nomination. These are all fair points to make, but don't make that point as a way to somehow then go on to imply that it would be easier to do it as a third party candidate. And again, I am supportive of the third party candidate, or the third party movement. I vote for third party candidates. I'm supportive of Dr. West, but I'm not under the illusion that it's somehow easier what Dr. West is doing than what Bernie Sanders did. And Bernie Sanders got a lot closer than I think Dr. West is going to get, if I'm going to be honest, you know, and that doesn't change the fact that I support Cornel West. I'm not a nihilist. You know, I still think
it's different goals, right? Because, like, I mean, technically, I think that Cornel West will get more votes in the general election than Bernie Sanders ever did.
Right. But as far as like getting closer to the White House,
well, it's kind of relative, right? Because both times Bernie was cheated out of the so for sure in 2016. So he never even got to compete. Like, he handicapped himself before it even got started, which is why I think a lot of people do feel differently about a Cornel West run, because it actually will, like, make progress and leave a mark in a way that's more tangible than just, like, getting policy positions in the forefront of people's minds. But this will also have a legacy of, like, establishing, like, a 5% threshold, you know, potentially getting even more ballot access. You know, I know they're at 48 states. Who knows if that will be the peak or not, but you know what I'm saying? I think that's why, because a lot of people feel like the Bernie thing was always over before it could even get started. That's, I think, what draws a lot of people to Cornel West. It's what draws me to Cornel West as a third-party candidate.
No, I mean, I make these points all the time. You don't have to tell me the like point of the Cornel West campaign.
Well, yeah, I'm just giving you the opposite of the point of what you just made.
Well, no, you're not, because you're making points that I'm aware of. And the thing that I'm pointing out is that there is no historical precedent for a third party candidate getting into the White House, unfortunately. So you can't say it's easier. I'm not saying there aren't benefits to it, but I'm saying don't act like it's easier.
No, I
don't
said that you get closer.
Well, that's a different argument. Because
that's the argument you just said. You said that Bernie Sanders got closer, and I said he didn't.
I think he got closer to the White House, not to building a 5% third party.
No, I just disagree with that. That's the crux of our disagreement. I think that if you get more votes for president in a general election, then you got closer to the guy that dropped out before the general election.
Well, there's been a lot of Democratic nominees who have actually become president, and that's never happened with a third party. So I think that if you almost become the Democratic nominee, then that makes it like just statistically a lot more closer, if that makes sense. I mean, I get what you're saying. I'm not like, I get what you're saying if you get technically more percents in the general election, but I still think getting second place in a Democratic primary makes you a lot more likely to become president, or closer to the White House rather than frickin' Howie Hawkins, just because technically he got 5 votes.
I mean, I think that's, I think it's fair. It's just, I mean, it's a matter of like perspective. You know what I mean? I'm just saying that I think from that perspective, like, I think that's kind of what it comes down to, right? Like it's a matter of like, how are you looking at this, right? Kyle's looking at it from one way, you know, I'm looking at it from one way, you know, and Gavin, I feel like you're kind of looking at it in your own way as well. Right. Like, and that's why I think it's like correct for them to frame it as like, oh, has Kyle been taking big seltzer money and that's why he's changed his mind? Like, no, he's just coming at it from a different perspective. Like, and that's a big problem. I think it's like, I'm not trying to like frame this as like, who's the most ardent or serious leftist, like, right. Like, this is like legitimate, like strategy, discourse, conversations, like, you know, that everybody's going to like feel a little bit differently about. Which is also like my biggest beef with the framework over here is like, it keeps coming back. It's like, why has Kyle evolved over time politically? And it's like, yes, I know that it's easy to make that accusation and some people really fucking deserve it. Like Dave Rubin, you like can't hide from the fact that, you know, Jackson Hinkle, you like can't hide from that. But it's also true that some people just like change their minds over time.
Yeah. And again, like, I am 100% an advocate for the third party strategy. I voted Green Party 2016, 2020. I've been talking about the 5% thing for the entire time I've been a political commentator.
Longer than me. Yeah.
And I just like, I think it's an understandable political analysis for a different commentator who's not me to say, hey, as someone who's also been voting third party my entire adult life and who's also been advocating the strategy, I have yet to see it materialize into anything. Every election cycle, the Green Party does worse than the last time. Ever since Ralph Nader, who was their big guy back in 2000, they've had diminishing returns. They have not built a movement on a local level. They have not elected candidates on a local level. So how long is it going to fucking take? And how long do we have to wait? And at what point, like, am I allowed to change my mind? Again, I'm not saying that's how I feel, but I want to give Kyle Kulinski the charitability to evolve politically. And yeah, I do think it's fair to say that Bernie Sanders got a lot closer to the White House than Howie Hawkins or Jill Stein did. And for Kyle Kulinski to acknowledge that might be uncomfortable for some people, but let's not pretend like it's not accurate. That's all I'm saying. And I just wish that, like, yeah, you heard an opinion, you don't like it, you know, it doesn't necessarily make you fucking comfortable in the eyes of all the people who are pissed off about this. But let's actually like talk about the substance of what he's saying and not just do these stupid hypocrisy burns where it's like 3 years ago you made a tweet which implied otherwise. Like, let's actually talk about the freaking substance of what he's saying.
Oh, no, I 100% agree. And that I completely agree with. Also, I would be remiss if I didn't ask us all to take a look at this modern art right here that we've all been gazing upon during this exchange. I don't know what this lady's name is, but as her like face like blends in with that, is that like Cornel West in the background or something like that? I just think it's very poetic. It's very much exactly reflective of what I felt during this conversation. No, but I 100% agree with you. I think it's totally fair to like argue the merits of Kyle's position, right? Whether you know, like whether or not you agree with it. But I think that the left needs to get better judgment, I guess, because people will be like, you called people grifters all the time. And I'm like, yeah, when they are fucking grifting, but you guys just need to have like a little bit of a higher threshold for that. Like, you're allowed to change your mind, right? It's when you abandon your entire political orthodoxy. Like if Kyle came out tomorrow and he was like, guys, I think that single payer is out of reach. I think we just really need to double down and triple down on the Affordable Care Act. And I'd be like, that is crazy, Kyle. Like, that is ridiculous. You've never said that. I've watched you for you know what I mean? And then I would be like, wow. And then especially if he was like, but what you should also do is take this prescription drug, which is against the law on your fucking life. Then you would be like, oh man, like that's a red flag, right? If they start selling, if Kyle were like, I'm selling gold now on my channel, right? And also the economy is about to crash and you should liquidate all of your assets and buy this gold. I'd be like, okay, that is Kyle like betraying his morals. But like, there's a difference between that and just me disagreeing with the guy, right? And and it's funny, I ended up being the stalwart pro green guy in that argument. Gavin's the only one that's ever voted Green. He's voted Green twice. Both times I voted for Democrats. But that's what makes this podcast fun.
Oh yeah. Always great discussions. But yeah, let's take a listen to the rest of this.
He has no interest in listening to very many progressives in their party. They clearly are not interested in allowing a outside candidate that they did not handpick to take over the primary process. So it seems like in some cases, having a third party challenger is the only way for that segment of the party to have their voice be heard.
Yeah, I think it's dangerous too. You have this guy, Kyle Kulinski, to me looks like a lost member of NSYNC or the Backstreet Boys right now.
I was hoping someone would bring up his frosted tips.
Yeah, please, we had to. I don't think that's going to connect you.
Wow,
and I
that
are
was
both
that
coming
one
from
landed.
blue-collar backgrounds. I don't think someone like Kyle Kulinski with 1 billion books behind him and the frosted tips is connecting with a working class audience. I think his audience.
That's what the acoustic
is
guitars are for.
progressives who are politically engaged. Which, if
Wait, what'd you just say? Go back like 10 seconds.
She says with all the books behind him and the frosted tips, he's not connected with the working class. One, so the working class doesn't like to fucking read in your estimation, but what they do like is the fucking country music guitars that you have behind you. Like, oh, okay, come on, lady. You like,
Also,
oh yeah.
Like, I'm sorry, but we're a pro third party podcast. We're a radical left podcast. Most of the working class is not. Most of the working class is like, yeah, I guess we'll, either vote Democrat, Republican, or stay home. Like most working class people are not like, did you hear about the fact that Cornel West is running as a Green Party candidate? Like, I'm sorry, but what fucking world are you living in? And I'm not even defending the substance of what Kyle is saying here, but to act like he's really out of touch with the working class because he's not as on board with the Cornel West candidacy as other people. I don't know. It's kind of a weird argument to me. Again, can you just talk about the substance?
collar backgrounds, I don't think someone like Kyle Kulinski with 1 billion books behind him and the frosted tips is connected.
You gotta love the fact that having books behind you isn't working class or leftist in this lady's mind, but having a couple acoustic guitars is like, oh yeah, okay, whatever, Liz.
Yeah, I don't know. That's just a weird critique, but I guess it's just an offhand remark. Who really cares?
Oh yeah, for sure. I've made a bunch of stupid fucking offhanded remarks. Remember my 86 fingers thing that came out all floppy? It's what happens when you're trying to be funny on the mic. But at least one out of every like 7 or 8 of our jokes lands. We've been going dud for dud for dud on this fucking guy. I mean, it's news. And also just the lowest hanging fruit. Like, at least when I busted Kyle's balls about his haircut, it was because the Barbie movie was coming out, and I was like, oh shit, you're super stoked for Barbenheimer. But even then, it was late to the party.
Yeah. Also, I wonder if they're gonna try to get Kyle on the show. I know that he was at one point banned from Rising, but since then there's been new corporate management that's like bought up the Hill, I believe. Now it's owned by Nexstar Media, which also owns News Nation. So I don't think he's like banned anymore. I imagine they could probably reach out and be like, hey, do you want to talk about your comments? I'm not sure. I think it would make for a good conversation though.
Oh yeah, it definitely would.
With a working class audience. I think his audience is progressives who are politically engaged, which, if you are the Democratic Party, that's a valuable base, because I'm sure those people have blue collar family members that also vote. These are the people that are paying attention to politics, that make time for it for whatever reason. That is what they do. Those people are very important in the political and democratic process in the United States because they will remind their family about elections. They will tell them their views about elections. If you want the left to win, you should be giving your audience the talking points to win over their family members for voting for a leftist candidate. That just is common sense. And so to me, this just reeks of Democratic Party interference, Democratic Party consultants going and talking to Kyle Kulinski and saying like, listen, this is our argument for this. This is why.
That's hilarious. Okay, that's where it starts to get really crazy.
What?
Like a fucking secret agent shows up and knocks on Kyle's door in a fucking trench coat and and he says, listen, you really want to grow in this town, you know how you get up and you really climb the ranks in this town, buddy. And you're independent. Also, people like, what the fuck? You're working for a billionaire media corporation. Kyle's an independent broadcaster. We're like, why don't you shut the fuck up? Like, your checks, okay, you're the one that gets to have your checks squandered. We know what the Hill does to people when they step out of line. Katie Halper got fucking axed for her coverage of what was happening in Israel, Palestine. Okay. Like,
this is crazy. Again, I don't even agree with Kyle, but this is crazy. Really fucking arguing that he's taking talking points from the DNC because he said like Biden's better than Trump and he's not gonna support Cornel West. Like, really? That's like, again, for the 100th time, that's traditionally been the position that the left takes. Everyone from Noam Chomsky to Cornel West himself usually comes down at that conclusion that it's better to vote for the lesser of two evils. Like what Kyle is saying here is not crazy. This does not smell of fucking deep state talking points to me. I'm sorry, I disagree with what Kyle is saying, but this is wild to imply that him coming to the same conclusion that fucking Noam Chomsky comes to every 4 years is the result of him taking talking points. That's wild. And obviously, if we ever get fucking proven wrong that Kyle Kulinski is a paid shill of the Democrats, even though he constantly is supporting Marianne Williamson, who's running against Biden, if that ever comes out, do you not think we'll make a million fucking videos about it, JR Jr.? That would be a huge day for Kyle Kulinski exposed as a literal DNC asset. You don't think we would talk about that? Obviously, we'd fucking talk about that if there was proof. Come on. But that's ridiculous to say about someone because they had like a milquetoast take that, like I said, literally Cornel West himself agreed with 2 or 3 years ago.